Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Gabe Gutierrez reporting in Washington, where the White House is ramping up its criticism of UN members and others in the international community, asking them point blank at the UN today, where is the outrage and the revulsion over Hamas's attacks against Israel? We'll get to the very latest in the Israel-Hamas war, including new developments tied to the humanitarian and hostage crises inside Gaza in just a moment. But we start this hour with a grim question facing our government here at home, as new developments today on Capitol Hill further escalate concerns of a prolonged state of legislative paralysis. Right now, House Republicans are meeting as Congressman Tom Emmer, the third nominee to be Speaker in recent days, is scrambling to find the votes to become Speaker. But he faces incredibly long odds after 26 House Republicans signaled their opposition to Congressman Emmer's Speaker bid, according to Republicans on the Hill. Just 5 would be enough to derail his candidacy entirely. And that was before former President Donald Trump weighed in with a scathing statement this afternoon against Emmer on social media, calling him a rhino and questioning his loyalty. As former Speaker Kevin McCarthy told reporters today, his conference is in a very, very bad place.
We've been 3 weeks without a speaker. We let 8 people work with every single Democrat to put us in here to go directly against what our conference rules say, that if you do a motion to vacate, you have to have 50% of the conference. And so now we're in a situation where remove the speaker, remove the majority leader from being speaker, remove Jim Jordan from being speaker, every single person that's won. And now we just gone through a battle with elections of 9 people, 1 won, and now when we had a roll call vote, you couldn't get 217.
So here we are, 3 weeks into a crisis of leadership in the House, raising concerns that this Republican majority has rendered Congress ungovernable, paralyzed, in a time of intense domestic and international turmoil. NBC News senior Capitol Hill correspondent Garrett Hake has the latest. And Garrett, does Tom Emmer have a path to 217?
I suppose you could say he has a path, Gabe, but it's increasingly narrow. I mean, I think he was in a very difficult position when that vote was first tabulated with 26 members against him, several of those pretty significant hard no's. I'm thinking about somebody like Jim Banks, with whom Emmer has some longstanding bad blood. Marjorie Taylor Greene sounds like a hard no, a handful of others. And then that Trump statement really kind of slammed the door shut on him. I think that, look, this opposition comes from the MAGA wing of the House Republican Conference, by and large. And with Trump kind of digging his heels in, it's hard to see, for me, how any of these members who were even soft opponents of Emmer now flip, given the enormous pressure I think they'll get from the right to stay opposed to him. But if there's anybody who's got the tools and the information to turn members of the conference around, it theoretically should be Emmer. He's the whip. This is his job, to count votes and know what members want, and he's working it hard behind closed doors right now.
So, Garrett, when are we going to see a vote on the floor?
That's a great question. Emmer has indicated that he doesn't want to go to the floor unless and until he thinks he has the votes. So we might see more of like the Steve Scalise situation here, in which Emmer tries to work the members of the conference that oppose him behind the scenes for some period of time. And if he can't move them, bow out without going to the floor. I think a lot of Republicans prefer that to the drama and, frankly, the embarrassment of coming to the floor again and again on national television and being unable to elect a speaker, if that is his fate. Look, I think if he calls the vote, we should watch very closely, because I don't think he's going to do it as a tactic. I think he's going to do it if he thinks he's there.
So, to that point, I guess, Jim Jordan got 3 votes on the floor. How long would Emmer go before they try to move to a backup plan?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think the sense I have is that it's maybe 1 or 2 votes or none, right? I don't think Emmer wants to run the same exercise that Jordan did. I don't think that appeals to his supporters. I don't think it's part of his strategy. I think for him, it's if he can get close enough to get there, or maybe he misses by 1 or 2, you might see that. But this idea of escalating series of no votes doesn't serve him any better than it served Jim Jordan. And if he loses, if he's not the speaker, he does still have a position in Republican leadership that he can go back to. It's probably, you could argue, more his political imperative not to expose his own weakness with the floor vote than it was for Jordan, who's not in that exact same situation as a committee chairman, but not somebody in the elected leadership.
So at this point, what is the backup plan here? Is there any real talk about empowering Speaker McHenry, Speaker Pro Tem McHenry?
I mean, Gabe, this is the thing I've been trying to explain to people who have been asking me about this for weeks now. Unlike so many other things in Washington, I don't think there is no backup plan here. There's nobody in some room who's got some plan they're just not telling me. Like I promised, if there was somebody who knew the answer to that question by now, I would have found him or her. I think there are a couple of possibilities, though. I do think there's already some agitating for Mike Johnson, who was the number 2 in this round, to get his go. Okay, you know, maybe he can pull elements of the conference together, although I think he'd have the same problems that everybody else does. And there continues to be talk about perhaps trying to empower Patrick McHenry or some other consensus candidate to do more, either if it's McHenry, do more, or someone else be speaker with Democratic votes. But I got to tell you, I think things have to get even more ridiculous and worse for House Republicans before they would entertain the possibility of working with Democrats. That is the last solution the vast majority of House Republicans want to see. But look, we're starting week 4 right now, and there could come a pain point in which that becomes more appealing for the Republican conference.
You know, Garrett, we were just looking on the screen of that clock, 20 days, more than 23 hours without a speaker. I can sense the frustration in your voice. And thank you so much. Keep up the fantastic work out there, you and the Hill team. We'll bring you back if there are any developments throughout the hour. And we'll have more on the speaker's race and the consequences of this political stalemate coming up. But we turn now to the other major story today, the Israel-Hamas war, as Hamas is still holding more than 200 hostages captive amid tension at the United Nations today on how Israel should respond. The Israeli military says 222 hostages remain in Gaza, following yesterday's release of 2 elderly women, the 3rd and 4th hostages Hamas has released. And a Hamas abduction manual released by the IDF yesterday shows hostage-taking was a central aim of the October 7th attack. Meanwhile, a meeting of the United Nations Security Council today only heightened international tensions over how Israel should respond to that brutal terror attack. Take a listen to the UN Secretary General and then to the Israeli Foreign Minister's response.
It is important to also recognize the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. The Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation. Their hopes for a political solution to their plight have been vanishing. But the grievances of the Palestinian people cannot justify the appalling attacks by Hamas, and those appalling attacks cannot justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people.
Mr. Secretary General, in what world do you live? Definitely, this is not our world. Saturday, October 7, will go down in history as nothing less than a brutal massacre. Saturday, October 7, is a wake-up call for the entire free world, a wake-up call against extremism and terror.
And in his strongest words yet, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken made it clear the U.S. stood firmly with Israel and criticized those who have not condemned Hamas's attack.
We must unequivocally condemn Hamas's barbaric terrorist attack against Israel. Babies riddled with bullets, young people hunted down and gunned down with glee, young people beheaded, families burned alive in a final embrace, parents executed in front of their children, children executed in front of their parents, and so many taken hostage in Gaza. We have to ask, indeed it must be asked, where is the outrage? Where is the revulsion? Where is the rejection? Where is the explicit condemnation of these horrors?
Those comments come as the details on the spider web of Hamas tunnels in Gaza raise questions of when and how Israel plans to carry out an expected ground offensive. An Israeli army spokesperson said they're ready to act as they wait for the right operational and political timing, even as the U.S. has advised Israel to delay any ground invasion for both hostage negotiations and to allow time for aid to reach Gaza, which remains in the throes of a dire humanitarian crisis. This afternoon, I asked President Biden if humanitarian aid was getting into Gaza fast enough. His response, quote, "Not fast enough." And joining me now in Israel are NBC's Hala Garani and Josh Lederman. Hala, I want to start with you. What more are we learning about Hamas's planning and strategy leading up to the October 7th terrorist attack?
Well, we are learning that there were some clear plans to take hostages, as you reported there, and we saw after the release of the two elderly ladies who were let go and crossed over into Egypt yesterday, that they had that intricate network of tunnels through which they led the two women and then separated them into groups. The two women also described how they were abducted from their kibbutz and put on the back of a motorcycle. I should say that was the older of the two, Yeshevet Lifshitz, the 85-year-old. Her daughter there was translating with her mother sitting by her in a wheelchair. We are also learning. I have been speaking to a person that is close to the negotiations, that so far there are real holdups in terms of getting more people released. There are reports that the next batch of hostages, the hope at least is that the next batch would include more people, but there are disagreements surrounding some key questions. The reports are that those questions revolve around the supply of fuel to the Gaza Strip. So this is where we are now. We've had now two sets of releases of two people, 4 out of the more than 200. But right now it appears as though any future release based on current negotiations is not going to yield any positive result in at least imminently, is what I can report to you, Gabe.
And Hala, it was remarkable to see that hostage shocking less than 24 hours after being released. But Hala, I want to ask you, Israel is yet to launch its ground offensive into Gaza. Are people in Israel frustrated that it hasn't begun yet? Is Netanyahu facing pressure from the far-right wing members of his party to launch the offensive?
Well, I can tell you that just anecdotally, the people I speak with in Israel, I'm in Tel Aviv, so obviously I'm not going up and down the country, but where I am, there is immense support for a military operation. Just the latest poll that was published, conducted a couple of weeks after the October 7th attack, showed that 90% of Israelis are in support of a military operation. Now, there are family members of the hostages who are urging the Israeli leadership to hold off so that there can be room, some more oxygen perhaps for negotiations to allow for the release of more hostages. But public opinion, though it is against Netanyahu, 80% are very much opposed to how the prime minister is leading the country, and many of them accuse him of having allowed this attack to take place. Pretty much that same percentage of Israelis are in support of military action against Hamas, Gabe.
Hala Garani, live for us in Tel Aviv. Hala, thank you. And I want to turn now to Josh Lederman. And Josh, turning now to the humanitarian situation in Gaza, what do we know? Is aid still coming through the Rafah border crossing today?
Well, Gabe, over the last 3 days, we did see humanitarian aid shipments finally moving through the Rafah border crossing from Egypt into Gaza. And the hope has been that that has created a paradigm where there's a system in place. They know how to do it. There's an agreement between the Egyptians, the officials in Gaza, and importantly, Israel about what this looks like. As far as today, we've heard from just in the last few minutes from the Palestinian Red Crescent saying that more trucks are moving through the border. NBC News has not yet been able to independently verify that. But regardless, what we're talking about here are, somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 20 trucks a day, a drop in the bucket compared to the need for more than 2 million people who are besieged in the Gaza Strip. The officials there say it's something like 3% of what used to go into the Gaza Strip before the war, and that what has moved into there on a daily basis for the last few days has been wholly insufficient for the scope of the humanitarian crisis there.
And Josh, the UN has been calling for a humanitarian ceasefire. Today, the White House reiterated that it believed that would only help Hamas. Is that realistic, this idea of a ceasefire?
As far as Israel is concerned, no. They say that would simply be unilaterally disarming after this terror attack that killed well over 1,000 people in Israel. Now, of course, the concern has been both whether not having a ceasefire makes it harder to get civilian hostages out of Gaza, and also how the maintenance of these airstrikes is making it so hard to get humanitarian aid, and is really creating terrible conditions for the civilians, the Palestinian population in Gaza. But I want you to hear how the Israeli foreign minister at the UN today responded to these growing calls for a ceasefire. Watch.
How you can agree to a ceasefire with someone who swore to kill and destroy your own existence? How? The proportional response to October 7 massacre is a total destruction to the last one of the Hamas.
And I have to tell you, Gabe, Israeli officials are incensed by some comments that UN Secretary General Guterres made at the UN today, suggesting that the events of that terror attack need to be viewed in context of what Palestinians have faced over the last many decades. Israeli officials, including the foreign ministry, say that is essentially the head of the UN justifying terror against Israel, and they are now calling for him to resign.
Yeah, and the Israeli foreign minister canceled a meeting with the UN Secretary General today as well. Josh Lederman live for us in Israel. Josh, thank you. And coming up, how the political fallout of the Israel-Hamas war is shaking up the race for president in a key swing state. We're live in Michigan ahead. But first, world leaders sound the alarm over the worsening humanitarian crisis in Gaza. As fuel runs low, tensions run high, and aid remains out of reach for many. I'll talk to an aid worker with the International Red Cross. Next, you're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As we mentioned earlier, the humanitarian situation on the ground in Gaza remains urgent. Some food, water, and medical supplies have crossed the Gaza-Egypt border in recent days, but humanitarian organizations are warning without fuel, aid won't reach those who need it most. The Red Cross warns low fuel supplies could especially impact hospitals as generators run low. Joining me now is the permanent observer to the UN for the International Committee of the Red Cross, Laetitia Courtois. Laetitia, thank you so much for joining Meet the Press Now. What are you hearing from your team on the ground? How much longer can your team operate before it runs out of resources?
Our capacity to operate is extremely limited. The resources are very scarce. And as days have gone by, there's even more needs right now. The fuel, the food, the electricity, the water are essential goods that are really lacking for the majority of the population, but also those resources are necessary to maintain services such as hospital running and saving lives.
Today, President Biden said that he didn't think the humanitarian aid into Gaza was getting there fast enough, but he's also said that all the aid to Gaza would end if any of it fell into the hands of Hamas. So what mechanisms do you have in place to make sure all of that aid is going only to civilians?
Well, we've been working in Gaza for many years now, and we've been making sure that the assistance goes to the areas that we have identified as in need, be it the support of the services that provide water to the civilian population, that support hospitals that continue running and treating patients who need to be treated, particularly in the height of the hostilities as we see today happening.
What more can you tell us about exactly how these hostage releases came to be?
So our colleagues in Gaza have been supporting the operation of the release of 4 hostages in 2 different operations. We facilitated the exit of the hostages, allowing them to return to Israel. And we are ready to do more as soon as the parties agree on the next stage of this operation. We've been calling for their release from the onset.
When you talk about the parties, the U.S. government has been very grateful in public statements to the Qatari government for facilitating some of this. What more insight can you provide to us about that. How instrumental has the Qatari government been in securing the release of these hostages?
I don't have many details on this aspect. I think, however, that the support of actors and states that have an influence and can contribute to the release of those persons should be recognized and supported in their efforts. It is something that everyone wants to see happening, and in particular the families of those that have gone missing for days and who are without news in excruciating pain. So we thank everyone that can continue pushing for those operations to take place as soon as possible.
And Laetitia, has Hamas provided any insight into the conditions of the more than 200 hostages that it still has?
So the ICRC is in contact with both Hamas and Israeli officials trying to also connect with the families of those that are missing. We are trying to not only advocate for their return, but also for the human treatment, for them to have the necessary conditions until they are released in the fastest way.
You mentioned, 4 hostages released so far, 2 at a time. Do you expect we'll continue to see this cadence of hostages released from Gaza?
This is not an answer I can give you. This is really what needs to be decided by the parties, and I hope the rhythm can increase as fast as possible to allow for this return in the safest conditions.
Now, Secretary Blinken spoke at the UN today. Are you satisfied with what you heard, or does the U.S. and the international community need to do more here?
Well, what I heard today at the Security Council is, first of all, a unanimous call for the respect of international humanitarian law. The laws of war are applicable in such situation, and calling for the protection of civilians. This is a message that we've been repeating from the onset of the fighting, and this is important that is being said by the members of the Security Council and obviously the U.S. in particular.
Laetitia Courtois, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And up next, the view from voters, Arab and Muslim Americans in battleground Michigan saying President Biden is at risk of losing their votes as the Israel-Hamas war drags on. That reporting next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Some Muslim and Arab American leaders are warning President Biden that he could lose their community's support over his positions on the Israel-Hamas war. The issue is especially acute for the White House in the battleground state of Michigan, which is one of the largest Muslim and Arab American populations in the country. Some people in Michigan say Biden has already lost their vote for 2024. NBC's Shaquille Brewster hit the ground there to learn more.
Adam Abusala worked on President Biden's 2020 campaign in battleground Michigan.
I was working on Arab American engagement, getting people out to vote for Biden.
So committed that his Palestinian American parents put Biden 2020 on his birthday cake that year. But today, as President Biden shows unwavering support for Israel in the wake of Hamas's terror attack, Abusala says he's devastated.
Right now I have family in Palestine who's afraid for their lives, and Biden is doing nothing to stop it. I'm hurt for the betrayal that we feel from Biden, but I also feel like a little bit of guilt for what I've done.
Amid a humanitarian crisis and with the civilian death toll in Gaza rising, Muslim and Arab American community leaders warned the president's re-election support in Michigan could be in jeopardy.
They said that we had to save America from Donald Trump, and now we feel that we have to save Palestine from Joe Biden.
More than 300,000 Americans from the Middle East call Michigan home, a state President Biden flipped in 2020 after Donald Trump won in 2016 by just 11,000 votes. And although not all Arab Americans are Muslim, an exit poll from the Council on American-Islamic Relations showed nearly 70% of American Muslims backed Biden.
We're predicting this could be another 2016.
Nata Al-Houthi runs the Michigan chapter of a nonprofit that studies and works to increase the political engagement of American Muslims, called Engage.
145,000 Michigan Muslims went out to vote in 2020. Biden needs the Muslim vote in order to win. And right now, it doesn't look good.
The White House in Biden's campaign says they are aware of the concerns and are working to address them.
We mourn every innocent life lost. We can't ignore the humanity of innocent Palestinians who only want to live in peace and have an opportunity.
But the publisher of the Arab American News, who last year vocally backed Democrats in the midterms, is calling for his community to withdraw its support. Did you vote for Biden in 2020?
Yes.
Would you support his reelection?
No. I've already made the decision, and we are not going to endorse him in the paper. It's not only disregard to our lives, our livelihood. It's more than disrespecting me, disregarding my life. And while we see, you know, the kids, our kids and our families are being torn apart overseas, we're being threatened here.
In Michigan's majority Arab American city, the Dearborn Democratic Club president says he's concerned these feelings will threaten the party's full control over state government, but insists the sentiment can still shift.
We still have time. The president still have time to turn things around and make good progress toward the two-state solutions, stopping the war.
But as the war expands, nothing is guaranteed. Do you plan to vote for President Biden?
I'm a Democrat, and I support the democratic values, and I will always vote Democrats.
And that includes President Biden?
Like, we will have to wait and see. But that's what I'm voting. I'm voting Democrat.
And Shaquille Brewster joins us now live from Dearborn, Michigan. And Shaq, what are Arab Americans and Muslim Americans looking for from the White House at this point?
Well, Gabe, the most immediate and the most urgent call that you hear from folks is that they want President Biden to call for a ceasefire. They believe that President Biden has influence. He has respect in Israel. They believe he can get on the phone and suggest and urge Netanyahu to stop the bombing. They believe that will then slow down the rising civilian death toll that you're seeing in Gaza. Beyond that, they want to see a push, a serious push for a two-state solution. There was a lot of disappointment that they haven't seen that in the first 3 years of the Biden administration, and they believe that this could be a time to kind of resurrect that. And then finally, you hear people just saying, we want to be heard. We don't feel like we're heard. One person said you had Jill Biden, Dr. Jill Biden, the First Lady, come out here during the campaign. You had Vice President Harris come out here and say, you will have a seat at the table. One person put it to me and said, we don't know where that table is. Gabe?
Shaq Brewster live for us in Michigan. Shaq, thank you. And we now have some breaking news from Capitol Hill. 3 sources have confirmed to NBC News that Congressman Tom Emmer has dropped out of the speaker's race just hours after being nominated by his House Republican colleagues. Back with me now with the breaking news is NBC's Garrett Hay. Garrett, what do you know?
Well, Gabe, a couple of minutes ago, you asked me how long Tom Emmer would stay in this race. It looked like he didn't have the math, and the answer appears to be about 4 hours. That's about how long he was the speaker designee. The majority of that time spent in the Ways and Means committee room behind me just a few minutes ago. Emmer bolted out here with some of his colleagues, didn't say a word to the cameras, and that's about the time we learned that he had disclosed in the room that he was going to be dropping out of the speaker's race. He no longer saw a path. And I think there was some acknowledgement that the Donald Trump opposition to him was going to make this perhaps untenable. Some of the opposition that started the day sort of softly opposed to Tom Emmer was going to have a very difficult time backing out. And 3 sources familiar with his decision tell my colleagues Ali Vitale, Rebecca Kaplan, the decision has been made. Emmer will be out. And I can tell you there's a physical sense of the scramble right now about what's going to happen next. Congresswoman, we're live on the air right now. What do you make of this news that Tom Emmer's apparently decided to drop out?
Well, you know, I like Tom a lot. He's a nice guy, someone I get along with, but I couldn't support him for Speaker of the House. His voting record is what turned me. He had voted against President Trump's ban on transgenders in the military. He voted for the Democrats' gay marriage bill that opens up churches and other places for lawsuits if they use their faith and stand against it. He was for the national popular vote at one time, and that's not a movement I can support.
Had you communicated to him that you couldn't change your opinion? You sort of were locked in on opposing him?
I opposed him openly in the conference in our roll call vote, and that was simple enough for me. There was more conversations that went on in the conference, but he's dropped out now, and I think this is good. Here's what's going on. The GOP conference is changing, and it's changing to reflect America first. And Republican voters overwhelmingly support President Trump, and the GOP conference and the Speaker of the House should do the same.
But if Jim Jordan was the America First candidate, he couldn't come any closer than Tom Emmer's come. What happens now? How do you get anybody from any faction of this conference to 217 votes?
Well, that's what we're going to have to do. You know, in 1855, it took 2 months and 133 ballots to elect a Speaker of the House. I don't want to go through that. I don't think the country should have to go through with it. But I think Congress needs to learn a lesson. The House of Representatives has not worked for the people in a long time, and I think Congress needs to learn to do a better job. Our debt is atrocious. The border is unbelievable. We've got terrorists coming in our country, and the president is leading us to World War III.
Do you worry at all that every time a Republican candidate gets rejected because they can't get the Republican votes, you move closer to a candidate who gets elected with Democratic support, that the frustration just builds to the point where people do start working across the aisle on this issue?
You know, I think that's a good question, and that's the threat that's constantly brought up. But every single Republican in the conference is elected by Republican voters. They may be in a Biden district, but they're still largely elected with Republican voters, and they're supported by donations with Republican donors and the NRCC. I think it would be a complete fool's errand for any Republican in our conference to join with Democrats to elect a speaker.
How much did Emmer's vote to certify the 2020 election have to do with the opposition against him?
Well, it played a big role for me. I voted to object, and I don't think that was a fair election. I think there was a lot of election fraud. And you want to know something? It's okay to say that. No one's speech should be canceled. No one should be prosecuted. President Trump shouldn't be prosecuted, and I couldn't support a Speaker of the House that didn't object.
But why does it have to be a proxy?
What do you mean?
I mean, why does that have to be the defining reason why you would
That
support
wasn't
him
the
or not?
defining reason. There were many reasons. He also voted against President Trump's transgender ban in the military, and I don't support that, and I'm largely against, and I'm trying to stop and make it a felony to perform transgender surgeries on children. It's a serious issue. The Speaker of the House needs to reflect the views and the will of Republican voters.
But at this point,
Republican
we're almost 4
voters,
years in. Shouldn't you admit that the 2020 election was not stolen?
Oh, get over it. Guess what? I think it was stolen, and I can say that all day long.
What role do you think Trump played? What role do you think Trump played?
Well, Gabe, I don't know if you're still with us, but I think that was illuminating in a lot of ways. I mean, I think, you know, the Congresswoman's complaints here were echoed by some of these other members here. I think, you know, she represents one faction of this party, and you heard her say that she thinks the party is changing, and I don't think anyone in any faction would dispute that. It's a cause of much consternation within the Republican Party about what direction they're going and who should lead them. And now, for going on 3 weeks, we have no answer to that question, and frankly, I'm not sure we're any closer to finding one tonight.
You know, Garrett, a few minutes ago, I had asked you, does the GOP have a backup plan at this point? It's clear from your conversation with Marjorie Taylor Greene that they do not. And she brought up, what, in the 1800s, a speaker's race, 133 ballots. You know, how reassuring is that? Where do you see this going from here?
Well, look, I think there's a couple of backstops here that are going to force this issue, and probably the most important one is government funding. The thing that I was going to ask the Congresswoman, if I had one more question, was this all started with a CR, right? A continuing resolution to fund the government for a short period of time that Kevin McCarthy supported. It was the straw that broke the back of, you know, his support in the conference. It was enough to push those 8 members over the edge. Every day we get closer to the government funding deadline coming up in mid-November makes another longer-term version of exactly that kind of legislation more likely. And I think that's the kind of thing that ultimately somebody's going to have to force across the finish line. It's going to be an ugly job. It's going to be a job no Republican's going to want. But every day they waste not working on appropriations bills or negotiating with Democrats is a day that makes it more likely they're going to have to take a bill they hate and pass it to keep the lights on or to turn them back on after a shutdown. And honestly, Gabe, I think that may be the only mechanism to force this group to pick a leader, because in that moment, somebody's going to have to pass something on the House floor.
So, Garrett, in the end, was Trump knifing Emmer essentially the nail in the coffin here?
I think it was. I mean, look, I think Tom Emmer was going to have a very difficult path, as would anyone else before that, the threat of a Trump opposition out there was already quite damaging to him. But the vocal, specific opposition and call not to support him, I think really kind of slammed the door on anybody changing their mind to be pro-Emmer despite his best work to the contrary.
All right. Garrett Hake, our senior Capitol Hill correspondent, thank you so much for leading us through that breaking news and getting us through that scramble there on Capitol Hill. Garrett, thank you so much. And joining me now on set is our panel, Benji Sarlin, Washington Bureau Chief for Semaphore, Democratic strategist Amisha Cross, and former Pennsylvania Republican Congressman Charlie Dent. Thank you all so much for joining us. And Benji, what do you make of this breaking news? What happens next? Emmer out.
Well, it's a tough question. It sounds like they're powering right ahead with trying to find another speaker designate from some of the options who were eliminated earlier. They got Kevin Hern, they got Mike Johnson. There's a few possibilities from talking to members that our reporters have brought up. One is that maybe the problem is that there's too many people with ties to leadership, ties to these rivalries between them. You need someone a little more anonymous who might be able to unite them. Another is that nobody can get this. I mean, it's absolutely impossible. They have to declare some kind of bankruptcy here and look for a bipartisan option.
Is it realistic to think, Charlie, that they're going to empower McHenry?
Well, that might be the only option they have right now. But what is really disturbing about all of this is there's a trend that the opinion of the majority is disrespected. Steve Scalise beat Jim Jordan, and a small rump minority took him down. And they wanted to impose the guy who finished second place. Same thing happening here again. Ukraine funding, same thing. A minority wants to obstruct the will of the majority that wants to fund Ukraine. You don't like the presidential election outcome, you vote to decertify. It's anti-democratic.
And that's my point. Isn't that an extension of, not wanting to certify the 2020 election? No respect for majority rule. How dangerous is this for democracy?
Well, it's terrible for democracy, and it's probably even worse just for general governance. I mean, you think I was just talking about it. They were just talking about Garrett was talking about a continuing resolution to fund the government for 40 days or 70 days. It should take 5 minutes. Now, I was around, we could pass these in 5 minutes just to fund the government at current levels. Now, these are these high-stakes, dramatic events. This has been going on for years, but now it just reached this point of absurdity to the point that they vacated the chair over a simple funding measure.
And Amisha, what do Democrats do now? I mean, is it realistic that Republicans will actually go and try to work with Democrats here to elect a speaker? Probably not. But what about everything that's still on the table here? Last week, the Biden administration introducing this huge supplemental funding bill, $105 billion. You just heard Charlie talk about, funding the government in a few weeks. What happens now, and how do Democrats play this?
Well, Democrats are going to do what they've been doing. Democrats have to lead. Unfortunately, Democrats are not in the majority, so they're not going to choose the next speaker. What I do think that they will do is come with a list of demands, because according to the math, it doesn't look like anybody on the current list of Republicans who are being considered is going to be able to break even when it comes to getting to the next rung and actually taking the speakership. They will need Democratic votes. That puts the Democrats in a very interesting position in terms of getting some of the things that they want across the aisle. But I think that what we're seeing here, to Charlie's point, is a Republican Party that lost its grip, one that has no vision, but one that also is being led by former President Trump, even though he is not only no longer in office, even though he has all of the criminal litigation issues that he has coming up, but it took a few social media instigations to basically tank an otherwise very well qualified candidate who could have, set this thing back on track. And I don't think that, we're giving enough credit to the ghost of Trump that is still looming very largely over this Republican conference.
But do you think this trickles out into, or goes out into 2024? Does this affect the 2024 presidential race, or do voters, is this, outside of their daily lives? This is a general dysfunction in Washington. Will this translate to benefits for Democrats in the upcoming election?
It depends on who you're listening to and who you're watching, because conservatives are saying that this is just a product of Washington dysfunction. And that's what they're saying on all of their networks, all the blogs, everything that conservative voters are actually looking to and are supporting. And I think that that is a very different discussion than what is happening in more relevant media sources. And it's frustrating because they are literally using talking points that we've seen Donald Trump himself use. And he's the one who is creating the chaos and the mayhem and then, kind of holding his hand. And I think that right now it's really frustrating because there's so many things that need to be funded. There's so many things that we're going to watch imminently shut down. And the Republicans, quite frankly, don't care. And they're not worried about the down ballot races, which is a place we haven't necessarily been before.
And Benji, I want to turn back to you. Do you think that the time crunch here, this, the urgency of the government shutdown, this supplemental funding bill that's on the table, why do you think that this hasn't struck a more urgent chord with Republicans? I mean, we just saw that video there of, the chaos, the scramble of Emmer, leaving the Hill today. But has that chaos motivated Republicans to act? Why hasn't it?
It hasn't yet, because if there's one thing Congress is used to doing, it's going right up against a deadline. And that's often been the trigger for decisions that they've had to put off because they're politically uncomfortable, because they know they're going to lose a lot of members of their own party. Eventually, that's how we got the debt ceiling deal. That's how we got the deal that funded the government through November that set off this whole fight. They come up to a deadline. They know what to do. They can come up with something. Now, here, as bad as a shutdown fight would be for Republicans politically, which is why McCarthy took such extraordinary steps to avoid it, one that happened because you literally cannot pick a speaker who can bring up a funding bill at all, it would just be catastrophic. We're totally off the map. My suspicion is that the temptation might be to try to talk themselves into some temporary solution, like, for example, empowering Patrick McHenry for 10 days or so to do something, and then find that it's hard to turn it off once you've made that the way you're governing.
Charlie, does Trump's presence in all this make it impossible to get to 217?
No, it doesn't. I mean, they just defeated Jim Jordan. He was Trump's guy. So I don't think that's the case at all. But, we were talking about government shutdowns coming up and potentially in November. But I kind of feel like the government is shut down right now. At least half of the Congress is shut down, even though it's still funded. But, yeah, Trump has been a very destructive force here. There's no doubt about it. But these guys, at some point, you're going to need a power-sharing arrangement where Republicans are going to have to talk to Hakeem Jeffries, share power in some way, just to be able to do the basics. The only question is, how long is Hakeem's list right now? Store's open right now, so he should start shopping.
And Charlie, I want to get to 2024 right now, and I want to get to Tim Scott. He made a major speech yesterday on race in Chicago, and I want to play a little bit of his remarks. Take a listen.
I was raised in working poverty, but when I cut people's taxes, they called me a prop. When I pushed back on the president's progressive agenda, they got upset. They called me the N-word. And when I say that America is not a racist country, that every one of us can build our lives, guess what? Trended on social media. Uncle Tim.
Amisha, what'd you make of that event? Who was his audience?
So it definitely wasn't Chicagoans. As someone who was born and raised in the great city of Chicago, Tim Scott's message didn't resonate. But I think that what he is trying to do is reset himself as someone who's been castigated by the left and the right in racialized terms. And it's very interesting because this is the same guy who utilizes his personal story, I think in some ways effectively, here not so much. But when you're looking at a world that is anti-DEI, where you're looking at one where affirmative action just came down, where you're looking at one where attacks against black people and black progress are happening on a regular basis, largely pushed by state-level Republicans, it becomes really frustrating that he would try to totally restructure the argument. And I think that when you're talking in a city like Chicago that was built off of the backs of black people, that's definitely not something that is going to sell. They're still fighting for equity in pay. They're still fighting for equity in education. They're still fighting for equity in housing. That's not the message that is actually going to work. This is a guy whose campaign is falling apart day in and day out. His own super PAC has decided to pull out in several places. I think that he is trying to put oxygen back into a campaign that is basically on life support, and Chicago wasn't the place to do it. That message wasn't the one to send.
All right, Amisha, thanks so much. We're going to have to leave it there. Charlie and Benji, thank you so much for joining us here on Meet the Press Now. And I'm joined now by Democratic Congressman from Michigan, Shri Thanedar. And Congressman, before this breaking news, we were planning to talk to you about my colleague Shaq Brewster's reporting about President Biden's struggle with Muslim and Arab Americans in Michigan. But I want to start with your reaction to that breaking news on Capitol Hill. What do you make of it?
Well, the Republicans have shown that they cannot govern. 21 days now, we don't have a speaker. Congress is paralyzed. We cannot make decisions. We cannot pass bills. We cannot, when we have an international crisis like what's going on in Israel, Congress must act. And the Republicans who are in the majority are unable to choose a leader for 21 days now. And this crisis has caused, we are marching towards a government shutdown on November 17th, where hundreds of thousands of federal employees, their families are going to have hardship. We have national security issues. The Republicans have clearly shown they cannot govern.
And Congressman, I want to turn back now to the Israel-Hamas war and your reaction to the Biden administration's response. You recently ended your affiliation with the Democratic Socialists of America over their response to the Hamas attack on Israel. What is your reaction to what we heard from Muslim voters in Michigan? Does this track with what you've heard from your own constituents?
Well, look, President Biden enjoys a lot of support in the state of Michigan. He has created, over 12 million jobs. The infrastructure, for the first time, the bipartisan infrastructure bill has brought in money to fix roads, and he's working on the economy, the inflation. There's so much, lowering the prices on pharmaceuticals. President Biden has done a lot of things right, and he is right in fighting and staying strong in fighting Hamas. They are clearly the terrorists, and they need to be stopped.
But, Congressman, is the concern not real for 2024? Battleground Michigan, could come down to just, tens of thousands of votes. And you just heard in Shaquille Brewster's piece some longtime Democrats, major supporters of President Biden, say they can't stick with him this time around. So I understand your points that the Biden administration has done a lot for Michigan and for Muslim Americans, but what do you say to those critics who right now are looking at that response and they're not going to support him next year?
Well, look, the Muslim Americans have seen the bigotry and the hatred that former President Trump, put on them. We need to deal with this and look at this as a fight against terrorism. We need to end Hamas. We need to destroy Hamas's military infrastructure to bring peace. And, more importantly, the people in Gaza, they have been exploited, used as a human shield by Hamas. And, they're living in generations of poverty. And the people in Gaza need to be helped. And eliminating Hamas will go a long way in creating peace and prosperity for all, not only the Israelis, but also Palestinian citizens who are innocent and have been caught in this fire.
Do you have, does this war, does it give you any concern for your own electoral prospects?
No. I think it's the right thing to do to fight the terrorists. It is the right thing to do. Hamas is an internationally recognized terrorist organization. They entered the country of Israel, did atrocities, killed, innocent people, abducted people, separated children from their parents. Hamas need to be stopped. Such terrorist activities need to be stopped. They are holding 200 or so innocent people as hostages. Those hostages need to be released. They need to, there's a lot that needs to be done to ensure lasting peace in the Middle East.
Congressman Thanedar, thank you so much for joining us here on Meet the Press Now.
Thank
Up
you.
next, 3 of former President Trump's ex-lawyers have now reached plea deals in that Fulton County election interference case as the former president makes a separate court appearance in New York. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Stay with us. Welcome back. It's been a dramatic day in the courtrooms of 2 trials involving Donald Trump. In Atlanta, one of his co-defendants, his former attorney, Jenna Ellis, agreed to plead guilty to 1 felony count in connection to the Georgia election interference case. An emotional Ellis then read a statement expressing her regret.
In the frenetic pace of attempting to raise challenges to the election in several states, including Georgia, I failed to do my due diligence. I believe in and I value election integrity. If I knew then what I know now, I would have declined to represent Donald Trump in these post-election challenges. I look back on this whole experience with deep remorse.
Ellis is the 4th of Trump's 19 co-defendants in Georgia to reach a plea agreement. Meanwhile, in Manhattan, the former president was in court to hear his former attorney, Michael Cohen, testify against him in the New York Attorney General's civil fraud trial brought against Mr. Trump and his business. For more now, I'm joined by NBC News senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett. And Laura, how significant is Ellis's plea deal here?
It's really significant, Gabe. She obviously is an insider. She is a member of the Trump legal team, or at least was a member of the Trump legal team, so she can speak to a lot of conversations that others simply weren't privy to. As for the specifics of what she's pleading to today, pleading guilty to, it's about aiding and abetting Rudy Giuliani, another member of the legal team, and the lies that were told just after the 2020 election, namely going in front of the Georgia State Senate and talking about dead voters, talking about illegal voters, none of which was true, all based on conspiracy and lies. But she's admitting in open court today that that's simply not true and agreeing in return for only getting probation to come forward and cooperate with prosecutors about all that she knows, Gabe.
So should Mr. Trump be more worried about her cooperation or Sidney Powell's?
Well, it's interesting. Obviously, Powell's situation is discrete in one way. It has to do with the breach of voting equipment and coffee countering. Trump is not alleged to have actually participated in the breach of that equipment, but she, too, can speak to larger issues, as opposed to Ellis, who's sort of on a larger scale, talking about things like the false slates of electors, putting pressure on state officials around the country. So not just in Georgia, but I think Ellis has a broader sweep here.
And meanwhile, Trump has posted that Sidney Powell never was actually his attorney. So how troublesome could this be for the former president if he tries to invoke an attorney-client privilege defense, either in Georgia or in Jack Smith's election interference trial?
The problem with trying to distance himself from people like Powell, which you can understand why he would want to do, is that you lose the privilege, right? So if he maintains the attorney-client privilege, then arguably anything they discussed would stay secret. But if, in fact, she was not his attorney, as he's now claiming, then anything that they talked about would arguably be fair game. But all of this is going to get hashed out in court down the line.
And Laura, turning to Trump's New York civil fraud trial, was there any value added today by Michael Cohen's testimony?
Well, certainly having live testimony, I think, is powerful. There's not a jury there. Remember, Mr. Trump has already been found liable for the judge that's hearing this case. It's a bench trial. He's already been found liable on the core claim, which is inflating the value of his assets to get more favorable loan terms. This is all about determining the penalty. Having Michael Cohen there in the flesh, confronting them there for the first time really in 5 years, I think added a little bit of color. But as court closed today, he was being cross-examined about how he's changed his story before.
And Laura, really quickly before I let you go, once again, Mr. Trump posting about Michael Cohen on social media as Cohen was testifying. Yeah. How do you think this will sit with the judge?
Well, the judge has been very clear that he is not allowed to talk about court staff, but he's been now allowed to talk about the prosecution. He's been allowed to talk about the judge himself. So I don't see the judge clamping down on that anytime soon, as long as he doesn't say anything about the judge's clerk. That is off limits.
Laura Jarrett, thank you so much.
Anytime, Gabe.
And thank you for being with us this hour. I'm Gabe Gutierrez, and I'm back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now coverage continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.